Hey, so pre-launch for More Than a Healthy Baby, Finding Strength and Growth After Birth Trauma is today. And if you sign up through Booktopia, you get 30% off. So that's pretty cool. If you're anything like me, I thought you might want to just, it's not the same as going to a physical bookshop and picking it up and sniffing it and fondling it and imagining a Barry White track in your head. Is that just me? No? I thought I'd tell you a bit about what's in it in terms of the chapter outlines and that kind of thing, just to give you a bit of a feel for it. It will definitely be in brick and mortar stores. This is just the preview version. So we've got 17 chapters. Right. This book is meant to be super manageable, right? I do remember what it was like, bleary-eyed, small baby attached to you in the night. The way that I have written this is so that you can start with the what on earth is this? What am I going through? What does it all mean? How many people does it affect? A bit about my story, all that kind of thing. Or you could, in theory, if you're not in the space to read a book and you just want some strategies, you could flip to the last chapter, which is on page, let me just find the page. This one. No, this one. Okay. Quick strategies you can use right now if you're overwhelmed. So in theory, I wanted to create something that could just be like, I just want to flip to the end and give myself something to do. So you could do that. Hop in and out as you need to. Elle, who put the interior together, so what the inside of the book looks like, has done it in such a way that there's kind of like little signposts. So there's bits coming up like, okay, you might want to skip over this bit. For some people, reading over the details of my birth stories or reading too much about trauma in this particular headspace that you're in at the moment might not be what you want to do. So there's little signposts that you can skip this bit, come back to it. It's going to be really, really manageable. It is quite a manageable read. There's some science, research, academic stuff in there too, but it's not done in such... This is not a book that is purely written for professionals. I wrote this for a sleep-deprived, exhausted parent. And whilst absolutely this is a book professionals should read and need to read, both from the perspective of, I suppose, that interweaving of, the research, the treatment, the guidelines, but also the personal experience, okay? I'm not telling you anything that I haven't gone through myself. Either things that I am still using myself in terms of coping strategies or things that I have taught to clients over the last decade or so. So it is packed with all sorts of things. Let me tell you about some more of what's in here. So we start off, there's two parts. The first part is really the kind of like, what happened? Let me sort of take you through it, figuring out what is trauma, why does it happen, how does it happen, all that kind of thing. A bit about the nervous system, why trauma is not your fault, how trauma can happen to anybody because it is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. As I said, a bit about my birth stories. And then we get into part 2, which is kind of like the how to cope with it. So, coping with thoughts and emotions. I've got a chapter on this idea of like social support. Where is the village? How do you get support? What's the state of support for parents, particularly like post-COVID? We're not really post-COVID yet. We're still in it, but you know what I mean. A bit about hormones, how your brain works in terms of pain relief, in terms of managing anxiety, managing your mood, depression, all that kind of stuff, which kind of flows into helpful information if you're someone who has had a traumatic birth and thinks that you might want to birth again. Potentially that's going to really help you, and that takes a lot of the training that I've had in psychophysiology when I used to help people with self-harm. Those two things are seemingly not connected, but they are in terms of what the brain does with stress and pain and pleasure sensations, which also nicely ties into what I used to teach with hypnobirthing. So the whole mind-body connection thing is it's all really, really, really relevant information. There's a whole chapter on breath. So breathing techniques, relaxation breathing versus stress breathing, retraining yourself how to do that. And I'll also talk about my experience of breath work, not as a practitioner, I'm not trained in it, but as my personal experience going along and participating in it. Debriefs. Do you need one? Why would you have one? What is one? How do we all disagree or agree on what it is? Is it useful? What are the actual research evidence guidelines about it? What do you need to know if you're going to go and sign yourself up for one? Post-traumatic growth. This is like potentially one of my favourite things to talk about. This is the when you're ready, when you're in the right place, even though you're never really going to be ready and you're never really be in the right place, to start finding the strength and to not see yourself so much as a victim anymore, but see yourself as a warrior, which takes time. And this is not something to get to 2 seconds after birth. I'm not a fan of the like positivity pom-pom brigade, getting in and 2 seconds after someone's had a trauma saying that you should just be positive and be more grateful and all that. This is not that. This is the roadmap of where you could get to when you are ready, not ready, but to give you an idea of where you could go. Because I guess this is the thing, birth trauma, like any trauma, it is actually quite treatable. It's bloody hard work. It is really, really hard work. And we're going to talk about in the book some of the things that you can do to get yourself ready to get ready, I suppose, to do this work. But once you get there, the transformation, the growth, the strength that you can find, phenomenal. I wouldn't have written this book had it not been for these births. I just wouldn't have. I've got a chapter in here as well about finding holistic support. So this is a bit beyond the, yes, go to your GP, get a referral. It's more than that. What are some options? Because not one thing is going to suit all families and all individuals. So as much as possible, a holistic kind of, and when I say holistic, I mean not just the mind work, not just the talking about it, thinking about the trauma, but getting on board with practitioners who can help you with the trauma that has been stored in the body and looking after yourself. Lots and lots and lots of options, so I'll cover a few of those. Some kind of problem solving, but what if you've tried getting support and it hasn't worked? This is a really, really, really common thing in trauma that not enough people are talking about. It's not quite as simple as go find a psychologist, counsellor, psychiatrist, whoever else, and off you go. Sometimes it takes a few goes, and the fit has to be pretty spot on. And there's a lot that goes on with self-sabotage. So I get into all of that, and it's a place to go back to, I suppose, in terms of if you've tried getting support and you're one of those people like, I've tried everything, I'm like, maybe you have. Maybe you have, but here are the common stumbling blocks for why trauma work is often like 2 steps forward, 50 steps back, another half step forward, excuse me, another 30 steps back. Trauma clients need a lot of support. They need a lot of hand-holding. They need a lot of understanding. That balance between understanding that this is hard and we don't move towards things that are hard. We move away from things that are hard. So getting someone who understands the fact that you're going to do all sorts of self-sabotaging things, cancel appointments, not turn up, get sick, find a substance addiction, whatever it might be, but also balancing that with the postpartum period, which is people have babies. Imagine that. Appointments are not frequently offered at a time that is convenient, or when you're really in the depths of the really hard times, but also someone who's going to hold all of that and still push you to keep going in a gentle, encouraging way. It's a really hard balance to strike sometimes. So there's a whole chapter on that. There's breastfeeding trauma. This is another thing that's not talked about enough. Birth trauma doesn't just happen with the birth itself. It can be a continuation of, with breastfeeding, chest feeding, whatever your experience has been there. And I think there's a lot of information about how to, well, at least how I found myself processing it, some techniques to kind of go, okay, this is how I'm going to make sense of it. And also, you know, looking at the protective things, the not just the what went wrong, because I don't want to ever talk about how people feed their babies in terms of what went wrong and what went right. But I suppose the perpetuating things, the predisposing things, the things that were already stacked against you in terms of support and culture and There's so many things that go into this. But also, you know, how to get yourself to that point of like the story that you're going to tell yourself, which for me took a long time to get to the point of the story of it doesn't mean that I'm a failure because I couldn't breastfeed in the way I wanted to. It means, you know, you do anything for your child, and sometimes that means prioritising your mental health, prioritising your physical health, acknowledging that this whole thing of like, ring if you need me, ring if you need services, is doing people an injustice. We need people to be there from day dot saying breastfeeding support, information, education, and just really looking after people in that capacity. So there's a whole chapter on that. Bonding and attachment, which I've called I don't even know if I like my baby. This is the thing we need to talk about. Bonding and attachment are not instant. It can be, but it can also be a learned skill. So I've talked about that. The vicarious trauma, the shut up didn't happen to you, what are you talking about? So how does this impact partners? How does this impact birth workers who are witnessing trauma? Birthing again, when you're shit scared, in inverted commas. So a whole chapter on the, I don't know if I can do this again. I know, I said that myself too. How to prepare yourself, knowing that there is no 100% preventing birth trauma. This is not like a how-to for how to not get traumatized, but here are some things to think about that you might want to do differently in terms of supporting yourself better next time. Grief and loss, there's a whole chapter on that as well. It's important to acknowledge that not everybody who's had a traumatic birth has a baby at the end. So it can mean death, but it can also mean the loss of your identity, the loss of job, the loss of your physical capacities if you've had an injury or an illness or something like that. So grief and loss very, very broadly, not just about infant loss, but that is covered in the book too. And as I said, that last chapter on like quick strategies you can use if you don't want to read any of the rest of the book, or you're not in a place to read it right now, but you just want give me some coping tools now. So I hope that is helpful. I will go into more detail as we go. It's just a bit of an overview if you were in a bookshop, as I said, flipping through the pages and having a look. That's a little bit of the content of what you would find.